Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with summer squash and sausage stew. That's right, this is another installment in our long-running series, What the Heck Am I Supposed to Do with All These Summer Squash? And this time we're utilizing a super simple tomatoey, potatoey sausage stew in which to hide the aforementioned squash. And oh man, did it work beautifully. So check this out, this was absolutely delicious. So I have a couple andouille sausage, those are lightly smoked, pork sausage, a little spicy. I have some round green summer squash, some yellow zucchini, and what they call white or silver zucchini. So step one, I'm going to slice up the sausage. So I cut those in half, and I thought I was going to do 4 slices at once. But after a couple cuts, I realized I'm not cutting them that even. So I just went to doing 2 instead, which was much easier. So the moral of the story, don't be a hero, okay? So we're going to slice up our sausage, and then of course we're going to cut up our squash. I'm going to cut the end off. I'm going to cut this in half. Then I'll use a little angled cut at the bottom to remove that. Although I think that's optional. I'm pretty sure that's not poisonous, so up to you. And then we're going to cut each half in half, and then across in 3 sections, just like that. And you know the drill here. Once you've picked a size, you got to stick with it. So try to get as evenly sized pieces as possible. That's only because we want it to cook at the same rate, all right? And even though our zucchini is a different shape than the round squash, we're still going to cut off the ends, cut it in half, all right, cut that down the middle, and use that first green squash we cut as a guide to get similarly sized pieces. So take your time and cut up your squash as uniformly as possible. And then besides our sausage and squash, we're also going to add some potatoes. So I have some Yukon Gold potatoes that I've peeled and quartered. And if you're going low carb, those are optional, but this stew is 10 to 15 times better with the potatoes. And that's not my opinion, that is a fact. So I'm going to prep those and just leave them in water till needed. And at that point, we're going to go over to the stove where I have a stew pot on medium-high heat with a little bit of olive oil. I'm going to throw in my andouille sausage, and we're going to saute those for about 3 or 4 minutes until they begin to caramelize. And don't be surprised if it smells really good at this point. All right, once the edges start to brown, we're going to go ahead and dump in a diced onion. You can probably lower your heat down to medium at this point, and we're just going to sweat those onions with that sausage for about 5 minutes until they soften and turn translucent. They should look something like that. And at that point, we're going to throw in a whole bunch of garlic. And we're only going to cook the garlic for about a minute. We don't want it to brown. We're just going to give it a quick sizzle. And then I like to dump in a little bit of green pepper. Now you can use green bell pepper, but I'm actually using a jalapeno I had in the fridge. You know I don't mind this spicy, and jalapeno is not even that spicy anyway. But I think you do want a little bit of green pepper. That little bit of bitterness really brings out the sweetness in the squash and the tomato. So I'm going to stir that in. Next up, we're going to add some tomato product. I'm using crushed San Marzano tomatoes, along with some chicken broth and or stock. So we'll stir that in. At this point, you can raise your heat to high because we're going to bring this up to a simmer. And while we're waiting for that to happen, go ahead and dump in your drained potatoes and, of course, our squash. And don't worry if it doesn't look like there's enough liquid. As soon as this starts to cook, those squash are going to release a lot of moisture, so this will be fine. Of course, having said that, with something like this, you're always going to adjust your liquid level, add a little more stock if you need to. So stir that in, and while we're waiting for that to come up to temperature, we're going to go ahead and season it with a good dose of salt. You know my thoughts on under-seasoned vegetables. I'm really not a fan. So we're going to add some salt now. Of course, we're going to taste and adjust later, because we always do. We'll also give it a little shot of cayenne and some freshly ground black pepper. And other than some fresh parsley at the end, that's pretty much it. All right? So stop me if you've heard this one before. But what we're going to do is bring this up to a simmer on high heat, and then back the heat down just to maintain a steady simmer. All right, something like that. And all we're going to do is simply simmer this uncovered until our potatoes and squash are tender. And yes, our pieces of potato are larger than the squash, but that's okay. All right, those potatoes are going to take about 30-35 minutes to get tender, and that's about the perfect amount of time for the squash also, because you don't want these firm. All right, we don't want it falling apart. We still want to identify all the pieces, but we want it cooked all the way through because that's going to give us a beautiful, mild, sweet flavor. And also a little bit of the inside of the zucchini will kind of break down and actually thicken our broth. But when you think you're getting close, you're going to test your potatoes. I just use a knife. Give them the old poka. All right? So when your vegetables are to that perfect point, I'm going to go ahead and stir in a handful of fresh Italian parsley. Stir that in. And other than checking for final seasoning, you're done and ready to serve. All right, so give it a taste. Maybe a little more salt, probably. And once you're happy with it, go ahead and spoon that up. I mean, look at that. That is so unbelievably comforting, tasty, and I'm pretty sure fairly healthy. And then for the final touches, a light dusting of freshly grated Parmesan. I really like what that adds to this. Maybe a little more fresh parsley. That's optional. But what isn't optional? A big slice of crusty bread. All right, I got a nice piece of walnut bread here, just absolutely required for dipping into that amazing broth. And yes, dipping the bread into the broth might be my favorite part of this. Although when you get in there with a spoon, you're going to see the entire thing is just fantastic. Like I said, the key is cooking that squash enough, it'll get sweet and tender. The entire stew is infused with that andouille sausage flavor, which gets absorbed into those potatoes. All right, just a really beautiful bowl of food. So now when your neighbor rings your doorbell with that basket of squash, instead of looking annoyed, you will actually smile and be genuinely grateful you're getting them because you could make this. All right? So I really hope you give that a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.